So let's come back and talk about the next 10 questions for your GS paper 3. Now, as I talked about in the previous class, for mains, answer writing is very crucial. Most of the students know the answer, but what exactly to write, what way to follow is very important. Now, this question talks about Niti Aayog and Planning Commission. So we have covered a detailed lecture on that. You can go back and refer that. The idea is you have to bring in a kind of compare and contrast phenomena where you are trying to understand the principles of Niti Aayog vis-a-vis Planning Commission. In Planning Commission, it was a kind of top-down approach. However, Niti Aayog focuses on a bottom-up planning approach, and that's one of the mainstays of the differences, we could say, which could be much more applied. So, decentralized planning, kind of cooperative federalism, is the basis for Niti Aayog. The next is the recent phenomena of protectionism and currency manipulation affect the macroeconomic stability. Now, here what we need to understand is, in the period of 1990s, we saw the world witnessed the LPG reforms, even India. So we were opening our doors for the foreign economy to flow in. We had lot of foreign direct investments, foreign investments coming in. But soon it was realized that the local art, the local handicrafts was not able to be protected. As a result, you had the issue of protectionism that started. And this is now a worldwide wave. So even when we talked about the US-Rwanda trade wars, as we have recently covered in the Down to Earth edition, we have seen that there has been a significant jump in the ideas of protectionism, not only in the region of India but globally. So we have been talking about Made in India. Similarly, Africa is trying to protect its own resources, bring in jobs, bring in security for its local people. America is trying to do the same, and so across the globe. So those are some of the case studies that you need to trace in. Then talking about currency manipulations affecting the macroeconomic stability, we need to understand the factors that affect our inflation, issues related to employment, GDP generation, growth of industries, current account deficit. So those are some of the important issues that we need to discuss. The next is National Horticulture Mission. Now, National Horticulture Mission talks about productivity and income for horticulture farms. The April Kurukshetra 2017 edition, we have talked about the horticulture. And that was a very important edition, so I request you to cover this video carefully. Again, horticulture contributes to nearly 30% of the GDP and 13% of the total cropped area. With this, we have this mission that has been laid down. So we are talking about an overall focus and a thrust on horticulture development. Also, when we talk about farmers' income, 2022 should be doubled. By 2022, it should be doubled. We are focusing on diversifying the sources of earning. So moving from the crops where you have the minimum support price that is being offered to alternative crops is one of the ideas. Then we are talking about increasing employment opportunities, bringing in diversification of income, bringing in more financial assistance, more quality production that could be there, more export probabilities that could be generated, and overall growth. So India is one of the leader producers in case of mango, banana, papaya. We have cashew nut, ackee nut. So those are some of the leading producers that we have seen. Now, the next question talks about how has the emphasis on certain crops brought about changes in the cropping patterns in the recent past. Now, this is a very important issue which has been discussed in the Economic and Political Weekly, the EPW. The idea is the crops which are being given minimum support price. So, most of the farmers tend to grow that crop. That is mainly the rice and the wheat. In this line, what happens is we are lagging behind in the production of, let's say, oil nuts, oil seeds, millets, pulses. So you had the process or production of millet that was pushed up, and we saw a significant jump in the production of millets that was seen. Also, 2018 was declared as a national year for millets. So millets cannot grow under very difficult circumstances that could be seen. So drought resistant crops are required. We are also talking about the crops of future that could be seen, which are much more resilient to the vagaries of the climate. So we have noticed that in the past years, if the climate is not apt, you have a lot of degradation of wheat and rice that takes place, but at the same time we have a significant jump in the production of coconuts that have been registered. So we have to mark out the changes in the cropping pattern that have occurred, and therefore the emphasis on millet production production and consumption has been important. So ragi is rich in calcium, you have bajra which is rich in iron. So those are some of the important crops which are rich in dietary fibers have been pushed up. The next is, there has been a lot of activity in the field of biotechnology and how it has affected biopharma. So definitely when we say biotechnology, it comes to play in agriculture, environmental friendly products. We are talking about replacements of plastics. We are talking about industrial biotechnology, interdisciplinary field where we are talking about nanobiotechnology. So those are some of the issues that you must focus. Now how this has benefited biopharma is important because we have lots of programs coming up with DBT, that is Department of Biotechnology. We are talking about more research and development in biopharma field. We are talking about companies manufacturing wide range of products using biotechnology, and as a result the growth is not restrained to India but it is globally. The next is, with growing energy needs, should India keep on expanding its nuclear energy program? The facts and fears. Now the first fear that you could point out here is the Fukushima disaster that took place recently. The next is the facts. So definitely it is cleaner source, it can stand more vagaries of nature, it does not depend we do not depend on it similar to the solar energy where the sunlight is available, only then you can have the energy production that could take place. The smaller area is required for production of nuclear energy, also lesser uranium is required for the same. However, there are numerous issues that we face under nuclear energy. The first is a possible nuclear havoc that could occur. It is hard to manage the amount of nuclear waste that is being generated. Also, the lifespan of the nuclear plants is limited. The disposal of the nuclear waste is problematic. It could bring in problems of generation if there is a kind of issue that could be seen in. So Bhopal gas tragedy was an example where gas leakage, the methyl isocyanate led to malfunctionings and malformalities across generations that have registered. And similar is the case with the nuclear issues. We have the regions of a nuclear bomb that were witnessed, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which have the same issues. So the power plant, the generation is important, but they do have a lot of external dependence that is seen. Now, how does biodiversity vary in India? What is the Biodiversity Act 2002? So there are two questions, give 50% importance to each of those. So equal amount of writing for both the sections. Biodiversity definitely varies across India. We have 4 biodiversity hotspots that are registered. India accounts for nearly 7% of the recorded species, which support nearly 18% of the population that is there. Also, we have nearly 34 globally identifiable hotspots. From those, the major ones are in India. So you have the Western Ghats, you have the northeastern regions, the eastern Himalayan regions. Now, talking about the Biodiversity Act 2002, it was an attempt to understand the UN efforts for a national convention for biodiversity, and it talked about sovereign rights. So the things that were taken into account was conservation of biodiversity, talking about sustainable issues, the major components of biodiversity, talking about equitable sharing of the resources that are there, and percolation of the knowledge that is very, very important. The next is the disaster risk management before and after the Sendai framework. So before the Sendai framework, the disaster risk strategy was called as the National Disaster Management Act 2005, which aimed to make India disaster resilient. So we were trying to significantly reduce the loss of life and the asset. The next was the Sendai framework. The Sendai framework recently released the first ever National Disaster Management Plan. It was a document which aimed at reducing the disaster losses, talking about the 4 priorities, that was to understand the risk of the disaster, improve the governance that is there, invest more in disaster reduction, and talk about a kind of preparedness for the disaster. So there was a kind of regional approach that was laid down, and definitely it was a kind of conceptualization which was taken from the 2005 action plan that was there, with few of the major things. First was to understand the disaster risk, the governance of the disaster, enhance the preparedness of the disaster, and focus on recovery, rehabilitation and reconstruction that was there. The next is B.N. Sri Krishna Committee report for cybersecurity. Now, cybersecurity has been one of the major issues since the time you had the advent of computers. So, you had protection of the data, providing regulation of the data, that was important, and B.N. Sri Krishna Committee report is very, very important even today. So, even for this year, this committee report recommendations become very, very important. If not directly, issues related to digital India, issues related to cybersecurities are very, very important for your examination perspective. So the bill includes various aspects talking about the right to seek correction for personal data, the right to seek or obtain confirmation about certain information, the steps to protect the interest, protect the misuse of the personal data, ensure the compliance that occurs with the bill, transfer of data within India, transfer of data outside India, talking about sensitive personal data, talking about data leakages. Aadhaar amendment bill was one of the major issues that we focus on. So biometric data, so those are some of the major issues that we focus on. However, there were certain weaknesses that were realized under this. The most important was the heavy penalties that was introduced, the large number of amendments that were seen, the dilution of the laws, the impact of the enforcement mechanism that was seen, the cost that was being borne to the companies, and the classification of the data that took place. The next is opium trade. So India falls in the opium triangle, and opium has been one of the major concerns in India. So since we are in the golden triangle and the golden crescent, we are one of the two largest areas of illicit opium production that has been seen. Now drug traffickers have been centers for the activity of opium generation. Coordination needs to be improved among agencies. We need to have more intelligence gathering, much more regulated amount of information that could be seen by the government. Issues of corruption needs to be checked out. You also have independent agencies that must be working in this line. The borders need to be sealed properly so that there is no trade that is going outside the country, and definitely it gives birth to the issues of money laundering. Since you have a lot of corruption that is involved, human trafficking that is involved, you have to have counter mechanisms that could basically curb this issue. So those are some of the major things that we need to address. In the coming sessions, we would be talking about the remaining papers of GS. So GS paper 1, 2 and 4 we would be discussing further. Stay tuned for the updates. Have a wonderful day ahead.